The freezing wind screamed across the dry Missouri farmland as if trying to tear down every last memory that still lingered in its silence. Marla stood barefoot on the porch, her coat barely clinging to her shoulders, fists clenched. "He's not garbage," she whispered through gritted teeth, staring at the distant man who had just kicked the wounded German shepherd into the dirt like a broken toy. The dog hadn't made a sound, not when the boot landed, not when his chain was yanked. He just looked away, eyes hollow, spirit somewhere long gone. Marla was only 11, but her heart carried more weight than most adults she knew. Her father used to say she had the kind of soul that felt everything too deeply. Maybe that's why she hadn't cried since the night he left. Not for her, not for her mother, not even when they sold the piano to keep the heat running through the last brutal winter. But something cracked inside her when she saw that dog fall and not even try to get back up. The neighbor's property was a wreck. Half-collapsed barns, rusted wire fencing, and the kind of silence that made even birds avoid landing. Marla had only come because her uncle sent her to borrow a wrench. She never expected to find a dying soul chained behind the feed shed. His fur was mottled with old blood and motor oil, his leg curled unnaturally beneath him, like it no longer knew how to be a limb. One ear was torn nearly in half, and yet, when she stepped closer, his eyes moved, not with fear, with exhaustion, the kind that screams without making a sound. "What's wrong with him?" she asked the man in the ripped camouflage jacket. "Old army dog, I think. Took shrapnel a while back. Got no use for him now. If you want him, $5. The words hung in the air like poison. $5. That was the exact amount Marla kept folded inside the back of her notebook. Her mother thought she'd used it on lunch. Instead, she'd saved it for a field trip that was canceled, for a birthday gift no one remembered. And now, as if fate had planned it all along, that same money sat folded in her pocket while a dog who had seen too much lay dying in the shadow of a splintered shed. Her hand trembled as she handed it over. He didn't even look at the cash. "Good luck," he muttered, already turning away. The dog didn't resist when she approached. He didn't lift his head, didn't move a paw, but when she touched his shoulder, gently, slowly, he blinked. Once, then again. She named him Echo, not because of some movie or book, but because that's what his presence felt like. A quiet, wounded echo of something brave and once strong, still ringing faintly in the air. Carrying him was impossible, so she dragged a broken garden cart from the side of the barn, lined it with old grain sacks, and rolled him back through the fields. Her uncle would yell, maybe her mother too, but she didn't care. She had never done something this right in her life, and when the wind howled again, it felt like the world itself was pushing them forward. That night, Echo didn't eat. He barely drank. Marla stayed beside him on the cold barn floor until her eyelids gave out. In the dark, he twitched. Nightmares, maybe. His breathing was shallow. But when she stirred from sleep and gently placed her hand on his chest, his heartbeat slowed, as if even in sleep he recognized her. The next morning, her mother stared at the dog with disbelief. "We can't afford a vet. We can't even afford dinner." "I know," Marla said, eyes locked on the dog. "But he's not going to be alone again. Not while I'm here." There was something in her voice that stopped her mother mid-sentence. Something quiet but unshakable. Echo didn't move for 3 days. But on the 4th morning, when Marla brought him half a boiled egg and whispered, "Hey, buddy," his paw lifted an inch. Not much, but enough. Enough to make her chest ache and her breath catch in her throat. It was the beginning of everything. She hadn't rescued him. Not really. She'd found herself in the wreckage of a $5 life. Tied, scarred, nearly forgotten. And maybe, just maybe, they would learn how to be whole again. Together. The barn had always been silent at night, save for the occasional rustle of hay or the wind rattling the wooden beams. But ever since Echo arrived, there was something different in the air, like the entire space was holding its breath, waiting. Marla sat beside the old dog, cross-legged, her sweater wrapped tight around her. Echo didn't sleep much, and neither did she. Every time his breath hitched or he whimpered in his sleep, she laid her hand on his shoulder until he settled. It had only been 2 days, but already her body was learning to sync with his pain. Her mother barely said a word during meals. The tension was sharp, unspoken. They were already behind on bills. Taking in an injured dog, one that might not even live through the week, was not part of any plan. But her mother didn't stop her either. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she recognized that this dog had unearthed something in Marla that grief had buried months ago. On the 3rd night, as rain pattered, softly on the barn roof, Marla whispered, You were someone before this, weren't you? Echo opened one eye. The light caught the cloudy edge of his scarred iris, but there was something deeper beneath. Recognition, maybe, or pain that remembered things it didn't want to say aloud. Marla smiled faintly. I think you still are. The following morning brought the first real breakthrough. She had dozed off with her head resting against a feed bag when a wet nudge touched her hand. She opened her eyes to find Echo standing, barely, but standing. His injured leg trembled beneath him, but he was upright, looking at her with his head tilted just slightly. It was the first time she had seen him fully awake. His tail gave a single, uncertain thump. She shot up, heart pounding. You're okay. You're actually okay. She reached for a biscuit she had pocketed from dinner and held it out. Echo sniffed it, hesitated, then gently took it from her palm. His teeth grazed her skin, but not harshly, just enough to feel real. From that day on, progress came in waves. He still didn't bark. He flinched at loud sounds, metal clanging, sudden footsteps, but he followed her now, slowly, limping through the tall grass behind the barn. She would talk to him about everything. The kids at school who ignored her since her father's accident, the way her mother looked tired even when she smiled, the things she missed about their old life. Echo never looked away. He just listened. One evening, as she poured water into his bowl, Marla noticed him freeze, ears pricked, eyes fixed on the open barn door. Her stomach dropped. The sun had already dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows, but there was movement outside. At first, she thought it was a raccoon, but then she saw them, two teenage boys laughing and carrying firecrackers. The same boys who had once thrown rocks at her window for fun, and they were heading toward the field. Marla stood quickly. Go inside, Echo, she whispered, trying to block the barn door. But before she could stop him, the dog brushed past her and walked straight toward the boys. They didn't notice him at first. The bigger one, Jace, lit a firecracker and tossed it into the grass. Echo stepped between it and the barn, head low, body rigid. The pop echoed like gunfire across the land, and Marla gasped. Echo didn't run. He didn't flinch. He stood his ground, chest out, growling low and steady. What the? Jace stumbled backward. Is that your dog? Marla stepped forward. Leave, Jace chuckled, but there was unease in his voice now. Didn't know you had a freakin' attack dog. Echo took a slow step forward, teeth bared, growl deepening. The other boy bolted without a word. Jace followed seconds later, mumbling curses under his breath. Marla exhaled shakily, her legs trembling. As soon as the boys were gone, Echo turned and limped back toward her, like nothing had happened. She dropped to her knees and hugged him tightly. Where did you learn that? She whispered. Who? Were you before me? That night? She told her mother what had happened. Her mother listened, eyes wide, then quietly walked out to the barn and sat with Echo for the first time. She didn't say much, just scratched gently behind his ear and whispered, Thank you. The next morning, Marla's uncle dropped by. He brought a large bag of kibble and a pair of boots for her. You saved that dog, huh? He said with a smile. Or maybe he saved you. Marla didn't answer. She didn't know how to explain it. Not yet. But something about Echo's reaction to the firecracker stayed with her. The way he froze, then pushed through. Like muscle memory overriding fear. Like a soldier hearing an old command. Later that day, she borrowed a flashlight and began brushing Echo's fur carefully. That's when she felt it, just under the skin near his neck. A hard bump, not a tick, not scar tissue. Something cold, smooth, metallic. Her heart pounded as she pressed gently again. Echo didn't flinch. She rushed inside to find her mother. I need to see Dr. Anders, now. The local vet clinic sat behind the gas station, small and cluttered, but trusted. Dr. Anders was old, kind, and spoke more to animals than to people. He examined Echo slowly, methodically, then paused when Marla described the bump. He shaved the fur back and frowned. Well, I'll be, he muttered. That's a microchip. Let's scan it. Marla held her breath as he powered up the scanner. A soft beep echoed in the room. Then a string of numbers appeared on the screen, along with a file. Dr. Anders stared. This dog isn't just any stray. He's a registered military canine. Assigned name, Rex. Status, missing in action, Afghanistan, 2 years ago. Marla's mother gasped. Echo, Rex, lowered his head into Marla's lap and sighed. Suddenly, the mystery wasn't just about a wounded dog anymore. It was about a soldier who had survived something unthinkable. A soldier who had walked away from war, and straight. into the arms of an 11-year-old girl who needed saving just as badly as he did. That evening, long after the vet had confirmed Echo's identity as Rex, a military K-9 presumed dead, Marla sat in the barn in complete silence. Her hands were buried in his thick fur, her eyes wide with questions she couldn't voice. The scanner report sat in her backpack, still warm from the printer. It said everything she didn't know how to say aloud, that the dog beside her wasn't just a survivor. He had been a warrior, a forgotten hero, and somehow he had ended up here, tied to a post in the dirt like trash waiting to be discarded. Marla's heart ached in ways it hadn't since her dad's funeral. She remembered the flag folded into a triangle, the way her mother refused to cry in public, and how people came with casseroles but never returned after that week. It was like the world had closed a chapter without asking if she was ready. And now, here was this dog, this creature who had seen war, who had probably lost more than anyone in town could imagine, sitting next to her in the shadows, breathing slow, trusting her more than he trusted the world. The next few days brought a quiet storm of attention. Dr. Anders, unable to let something so significant go unnoticed, contacted the local Veterans Affairs office. The word spread quickly. Within 48 hours, 2 uniformed men showed up at Marla's doorstep, their faces serious but gentle. They didn't demand the dog. They asked for details, where she found him, how long she'd had him, whether he had shown aggression. Marla answered every question, her voice calm but protective. The younger man, Corporal Finch, knelt in front of Echo with slow, deliberate movements. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. "You remember me?" Echo's ears twitched, his head tilted. He didn't growl, didn't bark. But he leaned forward, sniffing the man's sleeve like he recognized the scent buried in the fibers of the uniform. Finch turned to Marla. "We lost contact with Rex after a roadside explosion. His handler didn't survive. The unit assumed Rex died too. But sometimes these dogs, when they're trained for years, they run. They survive." Marla didn't know what to say. "So, what now? Are you taking him back?" The older officer shook his head. "No, he's not government property anymore. His file was closed. You saved him. He's yours now. But people might want to meet him, his old handler's family, maybe others." That night, Marla watched the sunset from the barn window, Echo resting his chin on her knee. "They thought you were gone," she whispered, "and I thought I'd never feel whole again after Dad died. But here you are." The next day, a car pulled up to their driveway. A woman stepped out wearing black slacks and a blue sweater. Her name was Heather, and she introduced herself as the sister of Staff Sergeant Nolan Grant, Rex's former handler. He used to write about Rex in his letters. Said he trusted that dog more than any person, she said, holding a folded paper in her hands. "When we got the news that Nolan had died in action and Rex was lost, we grieved for both. But now, hearing that he's alive..." She knelt before Echo, tears already running down her cheeks. "You were his best friend, weren't you?" Echo leaned forward and gently rested his head against her chest. Heather sobbed quietly, her hand trembling as it stroked his back. After she left, Marla sat on the barn floor, arms around Echo's thick neck. "You've carried so much, haven't you?" she whispered. "But you're not alone anymore." Echo was changing. His body was still healing, but his eyes were brighter. He wagged his tail more often. He started barking again. Short, low sounds at first, as if remembering how. And then, one crisp morning, he did something that made Marla's breath catch. He retrieved a ball. Not just fetched it. He leapt for it midair, landed, and dropped it perfectly at her feet, just like a working dog trained to perform with precision. Marla's mother watched from the porch, arms folded. "You know," she said softly, "this dog isn't just healing. He's waking up." It was during the school assembly 2 weeks later that everything changed. Marla had brought Echo with her for the show and tell section. Something small, just to honor him in front of her class. But someone in the audience had brought sparklers for a demonstration on fire safety. As one lit up with a loud crackle, Echo's entire body jolted. He dropped low, eyes wild, panting hard, looking for cover. Marla dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around him. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe now. No more war, no more noise." That night, she asked her mom if dogs could have nightmares. "Absolutely," she replied. "And sometimes, the only thing that pulls them out of it is knowing someone's there when they wake up." Marla stayed awake for hours beside Echo. That night, she whispered stories, sang softly, and told him about her father. And for the first time, Echo slept soundly through the entire night. But the final surprise came a week later, in the form of a letter. The Department of Defense had reviewed the scanner report and reopened Rex's file. They wrote that, due to his military service, Echo was eligible for official recognition, a medal, an engraved tag, even a ceremony. They invited Marla and her family to Washington, D.C., to accept it on his behalf. Marla didn't care about ceremonies, but Echo, he deserved to be known, not as a stray, not as a reject tied to a fence, but as Rex, the dog who served, who survived, and who found his way back from the darkest places. And maybe, just maybe, so did she. They would go together, side by side, as survivors, as family. The drive to Washington, D.C. felt like something out of a dream Marla hadn't dared to imagine. Echo rested quietly in the back seat, head on his paws, while Marla stared out the window, clutching the official invitation from the Department of Defense. Her mother had helped her iron a simple white dress, and in her lap sat a medal case the military had mailed ahead. Silver, heavy, engraved with the name Rex. But to Marla, he'd always be Echo, the name she gave him when she thought he was just another broken stray, the name that meant second chances. The ceremony was scheduled for noon in a modest hall within the Pentagon's K-9 Memorial Wing. What struck Marla most wasn't the official decor or the stiff uniforms. It was the quiet reverence in the room. Rows of people sat in silence as photos of fallen handlers and their dogs flicked across a screen. When her name was called, Marla's knees trembled as she walked to the podium with Echo beside her, wearing a custom harness that bore both names, Echo, Rex. A general stepped forward to hand her the recognition plaque, but paused, eyes glinting. This dog didn't just survive. He endured, escaped, protected a child, and reconnected a grieving family. That's not coincidence. That's legacy. The applause was soft but genuine, the kind that said something sacred had happened. When the microphone was handed to Marla, her voice shook. "I don't know how to give a speech," she began. "I just knew when I saw him. He wasn't just an old dog. He was still trying to belong somewhere." She paused, glancing down at Echo. "I think we both were." The room was silent for a moment, then erupted into a standing ovation. But the most powerful moment came when Heather, the sister of Rex's original handler, walked to the front and embraced Marla. No words were exchanged, just tears. And in that shared silence, grief found peace. But what happened after the ceremony was something no one expected. Back home, news of Echo's survival had started gaining momentum. A national morning show reached out. A retired K-9 handler from Colorado sent a long email recounting memories of Rex's training days. He described a specific scar on Rex's side, one that matched perfectly. But what stunned everyone most was a message from a man named Benjamin Cross, a former Special Forces soldier who had worked with Rex's original unit. He wrote, "I don't believe Rex was in that explosion by accident. He was protecting something. I know what it was, but I've been too afraid to say it until now." A week later, Cross arrived at Marla's small town. He was tall, serious, and looked like he hadn't slept in days. He asked to meet Echo alone. The moment he entered the barn, Echo froze, not in fear, but alert recognition. His ears perked up, his body went rigid, and then he whimpered, stepped forward, and placed his paw in Cross's hand. "He remembers," Cross whispered, his voice breaking. "I was the one who trained him before he was assigned to Nolan. I thought he died protecting us, but it turns out he made it out. He must have wandered for days." Cross told them something that hadn't made it into the official records. The convoy that exploded had been targeted because a child, an orphan, had been taken in by the unit for medical aid. When the blast happened, chaos erupted. The child disappeared. Nolan died, and Rex was presumed lost. Marla leaned forward, heart pounding. "You think he went after the child?" Cross nodded slowly. "I think he never stopped. Maybe he followed a scent. Maybe he protected someone. But it's not just chance that he ended up with you." Marla sat back, stunned. Could it be? Her father had died that same month in a separate combat mission. Her family had moved across states. Everything had changed. Was fate reconnecting something broken from both their pasts? That night, Marla took Echo out for a walk under the stars. The sky was quiet, a blanket of silver stretching above them. She didn't need answers. Not really. The truth was simple. Echo had protected her, healed with her, and showed her that even the most shattered beings still carried light inside. But fate wasn't done with them. The next morning, a girl no older than Marla showed up at the barn with her aunt. She had tear-streaked cheeks and clutched an old photograph of a small boy standing beside Rex, years younger, but unmistakably the same dog. "This was my brother," she said. "He didn't survive the explosion, but he always talked about the dog who saved his life once. Said if anything ever happened, Rex would find someone else to protect." Marla's eyes welled up. He did. Echo walked toward the girl slowly, gently brushing his head against her arm. It was quiet, almost reverent. The child knelt and hugged him tightly, as if some ancient circle had finally closed. Back at the house, Marla's mother stood at the window, watching them. "You paid $5, she said softly, placing her hand on Marla's shoulder. "But what you got in return was the entire world." And in the days that followed, Echo became more than just a dog again. He became a living memory, a connector of past and present, of war and healing. The barn doors stayed open for visitors. Letters poured in. People left flowers, medals, and old dog tags at his feet. Echo never barked. He just sat beside Marla, steady and calm, as if he'd finally found what he'd been looking for. Not a mission, not a battlefield, but home. By late autumn, the barn had changed. What used to be an old wooden shelter for hay and rusted tools had transformed into something almost sacred. Visitors no longer came to see just a dog. They came to witness a miracle. Marla, once the quiet girl with hand-me-down shoes and a tattered notebook, now stood in front of crowds that gathered not for spectacle, but for a story that felt too honest to be fiction. She always told it the same way, truthfully without embellishment, letting the pain and beauty speak for themselves. Echo, once Rex, the war dog, the soldier, the survivor, had become the soul of something much greater than the past. He didn't bark or do tricks for attention. He sat beside Marla, still, alert, and deeply present, as if silently reminding people what love looked like when it never asked for anything in return. On a cold December morning, Marla received a phone call she never expected. The voice on the other end belonged to Major Elliot Hayes, a retired officer from Echo's original unit. He had read the local story online, recognized the dog instantly, and driven overnight just to meet the girl who gave him a second chance. When he stepped into the barn, his breath caught. Echo didn't react at first, but then, after a long pause, he walked toward the man, slowly, as if remembering a dream. The major dropped to his knees, whispering his name, Rex, and Echo pressed his forehead against the soldier's chest and let out a low, trembling sound that was somewhere between a sigh and a cry. Major Hayes stayed for dinner that night, his stories lighting up the room. He told Marla about the boy Echo once saved, how he shielded him during a raid in Afghanistan, refusing to leave even after being injured. He told her how Rex had earned 3 commendations before the final mission, one of which had never been awarded because they thought he had died. Hayes slid an envelope across the table. Inside was the long-delayed medal, polished and engraved, with Echo's military name. "It's yours now," he said. "He would have never survived without you." Marla clutched the medal to her chest, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She looked at Echo, lying peacefully by the fire, and whispered, "You never stopped being brave, not even once." That winter, the town hosted a memorial event in Echo's honor. It wasn't about war or loss. It was about resilience. Marla read aloud from her journal that she had kept from the day she bought Echo for $5. Her voice cracked as she read the entry from that night. "I don't know why I feel like crying. Maybe it's because he looked like he already gave up. But when he walked next to me, even limping, it felt like he chose to keep going. For me." The crowd stood in silence as Echo walked on stage, tail gently wagging. Marla knelt beside him, wrapped one arm around his chest, and smiled through her tears. "He saved me before I ever saved him." But as time went on, Echo began to slow down. His steps grew heavier, his naps longer. The vet called it age and trauma catching up with him, but to Marla, it felt like something deeper, like his mission was ending, not in war, but in peace. He had spent his final chapter giving back all the love he had once been denied. Now, his eyes looked satisfied, like a soldier finally allowed to rest. One night, Marla woke up to a quiet whimper outside her window. She wrapped herself in a blanket and found Echo sitting in the frost-covered grass, looking up at the stars. She sat beside him, her breath forming soft clouds in the air. He leaned his head on her knee, and she whispered, "You don't have to hold on for me anymore. I'll be okay." In the morning, Echo was gone. He passed in his sleep, curled beside the barn doors, facing the open sky. No pain, no fear, just peace. Marla didn't cry at first. She sat with him in silence, her hand resting on his still frame. People from all over town came, bringing candles, letters, and flowers. Veterans saluted. Children left drawings. The girl with the photograph, whose brother Rex once saved, stood in silence and pressed a single rose into the dirt beside him. They buried Echo beneath the oldest tree on the farm, facing east, where the sun always rose first. Marla placed the military medal on the headstone, then pulled out her journal. She read the final words she had written the night before. You were never just a dog. You were never just a soldier. You were the first heart that saw me. And now I see the world through the love you gave. In the weeks that followed, Marla received letters from people all over the country. A retired dog handler sent a patch from his own unit. A young boy recovering from surgery sent a crayon drawing of Echo with wings. A foundation offered to fund a program in Echo's name, pairing rescued dogs with children in grief or trauma. Marla agreed without hesitation. He would have loved that, she said softly. And so, Echo's story lived on, not in headlines, but in hearts, in every rescued soul, every scared child who finds strength in the eyes of a dog, every soldier who remembers what it felt like to trust again. Marla often walked to his grave in the mornings, journal in hand, barefoot in the dew. She would sit quietly, sometimes writing, sometimes just listening to the wind. One morning she whispered, "I still miss you." And in the distance, a breeze rustled the trees, soft and warm, like an unseen tail wagging just once, before fading into the light.